done some amazing stuff that just keeps me inspired. So that's Ellen I'm talking to right now, but I've got some other stuff before we get to Ellen. So we've got several things going on in the campaign in the next few days. Over the weekend, we're going to be placing door hangers on doors in Franklin, Cherry Valley, and Emlenton. If you want to get out and get involved with the campaign, reach out. You can write something in the comments of the live stream on Facebook. We've got some really exciting things happening tomorrow. I'm not going to talk about that though, because we're going to keep that cat in the bag. But keep your ears open because it's really going to be edgy. Check back on our campaign Facebook page, and maybe if we can manage it, we're going to do some live stream with that. We're going to be doing some guerrilla advertising starting next week. This, I think, is something that's going to be pretty new to the oil region. I'm excited to get out and do this. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here because I don't want to tip my hand. But if you think you want something a little bit exciting in your neighborhood in District 64, let me know, and we'll see if we can figure out something to visit you with. We're hoping to purchase some cable advertising so we can show off some of our great video content. And to do that, we're going to need to have some additional funding. So if you can kick in a few bucks, that'd be great. Visit our webpage at mikeforpa64.com. That's Mike, F-O-R-P-A, and then the numbers 6 and 4.com. Our next conversation is going to be a week from today with one of my other friends, a veteran, and he's an activist too. His name is Dan Galvin. We'll be talking about a variety of things, including the distorted narrative that's around military service and some of the things that Dan's up to. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. That'll be a week from today. Same time, same place. Check out our Facebook page for more details, but it's not there right now. It'll be soon. So there's been a whole lot of talk recently about our rights. In fact, this past week, I was in Harrisburg with March on Harrisburg. And while we were inside doing something, on the outside, there were a bunch of people outside standing, talking about protecting our Second Amendment rights. Well, Lee James, my opponent in this race, was talking about rights in the very first interaction I had with him. He was in office just a few months, and he sent a mailer, and it came to me. And what he talked about was fighting for our most important constitutional right while he was in Harrisburg. And he said that the most important constitutional right we had was the Second Amendment. Well, it kind of bothered me because I think of constitutional rights as they're all important. That's why they're in the Constitution. And so I wrote back to him, and I thought he was, I said, I think you're kind of pandering. We need all our rights. The First Amendment is pretty darn important. I think that's something that needs protected. Well, anyway, he wrote back to me, and I'm going to quote it exactly. He said, normally, I'd allow you to have your opinion. You can imagine how that went over with me. He said, but normally I'd allow you to have your opinion, but, he went on to say, if we don't have the Second Amendment, then we won't have any other rights. I thought that was kind of contradictory of the Declaration of Independence, which also says that we have inalienable rights, or unalienable, I guess is what it specifically says, and that those rights are given to us because we're who we are. But anyway, I digress. So tonight, we're having Ellen to come on and talk about a very specific type of constitutional right problem, and that is the Fifth Amendment. And I find it ironic that Representative James is accepting campaign contributions from a company that Ellen's going to talk about that has repeatedly violated the rights of the Commonwealth residents. And so what exactly are we going to be talking about? So let me just talk about Ellen first. I met Ellen in a bar in Harrisburg, I mean. That sounds pretty crazy, but actually what we were doing, we met because I found out about Ellen's story in this bar because we had done something at the farm show. And then after the farm show, we went to this pub. What do you call it? A brew pub in Harrisburg. And it was just a place to eat. But at any rate, I met Ellen there. And then I heard her story for the first time. And it's pretty crazy. And I'll let her get to that in a second. But you can see Ellen. Ellen is not like some crazy, wild looking, mean person. She's a retired teacher like me. And she doesn't look fierce, but she is. Anyway, Ellen, why don't you start telling us your story?
Gee, I don't know after that intro, Mike. Before I get started on that, what I'd like to start off with, so I don't gloss over it, is acknowledge that the fact that we are living on stolen land and that the original peoples of this land were caretakers of the land. And they felt a responsibility and a need to respect the earth, the water, and the air. So the very least that we can do is to honor their legacy and make sure that we continue the stewardship that they started. So, yeah, our story starts with, this was not on my bucket list kind of thing. Almost 37 years ago, my husband and I were living just outside of State College because we're both Penn State alums. And we wanted to move out of the city situation into a more rural area. So we wandered around and managed to wander down into Huntington County. And it happened that we stopped in a real estate office like 15 minutes before closing. And the realtor said, well, I just had a property come on 2 days ago. It sounds like it might be something that you might be interested in. So we went out and we looked at it, and it was kind of love at first sight. There was a house that was originally built in 1821 and 48 acres, most of it wooded, with a pond and some streams on it. And there was a series of wetlands in the back of the property. So we decided that we would go ahead and purchase it. And, we raised a family here. Both of our daughters were born in Huntington County. They were raised in a house surrounded by trees and streams and ponds. And my husband and I were sure that this was going to be where we were going to spend the rest of our lives. We were happy with it. We loved the setting. We had enough wooded area that we could wander around in it. We could, look out our window in the morning. We'd have deer in the yard or turkeys in the yard, or, all different kinds of birds at the bird feeder. So we were happy with our choice. The one thing that we did do was a few years later, now that I said how happy we were with the choice, we sold the original house on 11 acres and then built a ranch style house further away from the road. So we're back closer to the woods. And again, that was in 82, and that's where we still reside, in that same house. And, we put paths through the woods. The girls would go for walks. They would play in the streams. They'd find salamanders and frogs and bring them home and, do all kinds of stuff like that. And we never thought that there would be a change until in 2015, everything kind of crashed.
Can I just interrupt for a second? Because I one of the things I remember about your story was, didn't you also sort of commit to not cutting your woods down or changing them in any way?
Yeah, there's a program through the state. It's a stewardship program, and what it involves is you're making a promise with the state that you're not going to develop your land. You're going to keep it rural. You're going to keep it, if it's agricultural, If it's wooded, you're not going to do any kind of development on it. And we agreed to that because that's what we wanted to do. We moved here primarily because we wanted to be out in the woods. We have neighbors, maybe 3 acres on either side, but we're still surrounded by trees. And it's been that way since we bought the property. In February of 2015, we received a phone call from a land agent for a corporation he said was called Percheron, which we never, the only Percheron I'm familiar with is big draft horse. That's it. But he asked to meet with us because he said there was a proposed pipeline that would be going through Huntington County. So we said, sure, be interested in finding out about this pipeline. So we agreed to meet with him. When he came to our house, he had a map already sketched out of our property. So obviously there had already been surveyors on the property that we knew nothing about. And he showed us this map of where this proposed pipeline would go. And the first thing that we noticed was it was going to go under our pond and straight through our wetlands. And, it was like, I don't think so. How are you going to do this? And he said, don't worry. We're going to go under the pond. It's a thing called HDD, which is horizontal directional drilling, which is a relatively new process in drilling. And then there was going to be open trenching. So the HDD would go under the pond, but then they were going to open trench through the wetlands. And he quoted us an offer for a total of 3 acres of the property of $14,000 for the 3 acres. And he said, this is a very generous offer. This is more than the land is actually worth. You should probably take it. Of course, we turned him down.
Just to be clear, they weren't offering to buy your land, right?
No, it's not a transfer of the deed or anything. They're essentially leasing the property for this pipeline, although it's leasing with strings attached. So the next morning he called because my husband had said, 14,000 isn't enough. How about something, like 20,000 or 28,000 or something like that? And he said, I don't know if I can do that. I have to talk to my supervisor. We may not be able to go there. He called the next morning and said, yep, we can do 28,000. So the very generous offer of 14,000 overnight went to 28,000.
Wow, they are so nice.
I know. If the first offer was very generous, I don't know what you call the second offer.
They're just good folks. Yeah.
They have your best interest at heart. I know. So we turned him down again. And at this
point, what was your
Dave,
thinking on that? Why?
The thinking was they're going to build this pipeline through the wetlands. And if they're trenching, that means they're digging it up. They have to cut down, those 3 acres that they were looking at, with the exception of the small section that was going under the pond, the rest was all wooded. So theoretically, the HDD, they could do without cutting any trees down. But the open trenching, they'd have to cut them down. And if you look at the diagram that they showed, they had this very large temporary workspace that was on a steeply sloped hill. I mean, you've seen the hill that they were going to use for their workspace. I don't know how they were going to get heavy equipment on that hill.
let me just give folks an idea. I mean, it was
Yeah.
like this, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when you
could
say
sled down
steeply
it.
sloped, it was steeply sloped.
Yeah. I mean, you could sled down it if there weren't trees there.
Yeah.
Which there aren't now, but that's another story. Um, so, uh, he said, well, we had two choices. We could either accept the offer or we could have our property taken through eminent domain. And that's where eminent domain comes in.
Let me just divert a second, because
Yeah.
I want folks to understand that eminent domain actually is talked about in the U.S. Constitution, the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which people often think about as the amendment that people plead when they don't want to talk about something, they don't want to self-incriminate. But the last little bit of it deals with eminent domain. And they talk about, I'm going to just pick it up somewhere here, nor be deprived of, this is at the end, be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And then it says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Okay, so that's how the Fifth Amendment ends. So public use, and you should be justly compensated. I want to go back to your property. And what I remember about your property, when I first went to your property, I remember you, retired teacher that you are, wandering up and down those steep hills on those paths multiple times a day. I mean, you enjoyed, I mean, I remember there was like, I followed the path and there was like a little bench set up back in the woods, and the path just wound all the way through these woods. I mean, and you told me at one point, I know, that you walk them every day, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was something that, you valued. It wasn't just a piece of property that was worth $14,000. It was priceless to you, basically, right? I mean,
that's why we bought it in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said you were going to keep it in its pristine as it could be, in its pristine shape. So anyway, okay. So take it or leave it. Either you take the $28,000 or we're going to take it from you no matter what. You don't got any choice, right?
Right. And this is the tactic that these companies use, because they'll come in and, they'll make an initial lowball offer. I mean, it's always a low number. And they'll say to people, you should take this because otherwise we're going to take your property through eminent domain. And a lot of people panic at this point because they hear the words eminent domain, and, you see examples of, property that's taken for highways and, hospitals and airports and stuff like that. And they think, well, I better take this money because otherwise I'm not going to get anything from it, because they forget about that just compensation part.
Let's go back there, because you just mentioned something pretty cool that I think we need to explore a little bit too. And that is this idea. You talked about highways and hospitals and lots of other things. I mean, I can't remember everything you said, but all those things you talked about were oftentimes, anyway, examples of government coming in and doing things like a highway that would have benefit for the public, right?
Right. And one of the key parts of that too is it's the government coming in and doing it. It's not a private corporation coming in and doing it. So in cases like this, the government has kind of turned its part over to these corporations and said, okay, we have no interest in taking this property and through the government, but we're going to give that power to these corporations to do it. And there's nothing to say that these corporations are going to do something for the public good.
But this one is this
Oh,
is
yeah.
this is a gas line, right? It's bringing heating stuff to all of Pennsylvania, right?
Wrong.
Oh,
Wrong. And again, that's a common misperception that people have about this pipeline. They, as soon as they hear that you're fighting pipelines, it's all like, well, don't you drive a car? Or don't you heat your car or heat your house in the wintertime? We need these pipelines for that. Well, but that's not what this pipeline is for. This pipeline is carrying ethane, butane. It is carrying some propane. But it's all going to Marcus Hook, which is
so jobs in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah. All the jobs that they tout for this pipeline, and when it was being constructed, when you went out and looked, the license plate said Texas, Oklahoma, Michigan, North Carolina, Maine. I would say probably out of maybe 15 trucks, you might find one that's in Pennsylvania.
I remember I went to visit you guys in the middle of the winter time. It wasn't at your place. It was actually at Raystown Lake, I believe. We went to do a little thing to welcome them to the lake. And what I remember is one, a lot of the vehicles, as you mentioned, had out of state license plates, but I also seem to remember that some of those license plates were covered up, that they didn't want people to know where the heck they were from.
I don't know. They must have been ashamed of the state that they called home. But
yeah,
and that was typical. I mean, if they wanted to videotape you, that was fine. But the minute you pulled cameras out and started taking, pictures and videotapes of them, then they got very camera shy.
Yeah. So anyway, getting back to it's going to Marcus Hook, but what are they going to do with it at Marcus Hook? It's good stuff, right?
It's good stuff. It's going right on tanker ships. One of the companies is Ineos, and they put out this, I think it's still on YouTube. If you look up Ineos on YouTube, they have this 8-minute long promo about these dragon ships that they were having built in Japan. So they weren't even building the ships here in the US, but they were building them in Japan, and they were going to be these huge tankers that could carry, all this cargo from Marcus Hook over to Scotland and over to Austria, where it was going to be processed into plastic.
Just what we need. More plastic.
More plastic.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what's the public good?
I know. It's interesting though, because there's currently a court case going on with the Safety 7 and Sunoco. And one of Sunoco's arguments was that they're simply building the pipeline. They're simply providing the transportation from point A to point B. Once it gets to point B, it's out of their hands and they have no say over where it goes. Okay, but you know where it's going, and you're still building the pipeline for it. But, so that's a tactic they use. They scare people right off the bat into taking these, initial lowball offers. Sometimes people catch on to this and they realize, hey, I can maybe negotiate this. So they get an attorney and they go into negotiations, and they end up with a vastly larger sum of money than the initial generous offer.
So you guys did that, right?
No. I know people that did. And there's one case I heard of that the initial offer was $1,200 because it was just going up under a little part of someone's driveway. The final offer, it went from $1,200 to $60,000. So, people will negotiate and get a higher amount. This is what you have to watch out, because when we first got involved with this, we don't know anything about attorneys and stuff like that. So, we're online trying to find people, and we're looking up eminent domain attorneys and stuff like that. So we get an eminent domain attorney, and we realize that the eminent domain attorney is there to negotiate. He's not, if you're not interested in settling, you don't want to go with an eminent domain attorney, because he's trying to get a substantial deal, because he gets 30% of whatever he can negotiate. So you have the first group that panics, you have the second group that negotiates, and then you have the third group, which are the crazy people. So the third group are the people that say, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to fight it. And, it's difficult, and I can't fault anybody for not doing that, because it's time consuming. It puts a strain on finances. It puts a strain on you physically, emotionally, mentally. Like I said, this all started back in 2015, and we're still going. So this is 5 years into this, and it's not settled. So it's difficult, and to, at least for us, we just felt like we were playing catch up all the time. We were trying to reinvent the wheel, because we had no idea where to turn, what to do, what our next step should be. But we did eventually end up with an attorney that agreed with our point of view that, we're going to fight this thing. And when you get into the courts, this is where the courts and the laws are very much biased in favor of companies and their use of eminent domain. Like you said, Mike, the definition of eminent domain is the power of a state, provincial, or national government to take private property for public use. It does not include the power to take and transfer ownership of private property from one property owner to another private property owner without a valid public purpose. Okay, but unfortunately, the legislature has delegated this let's see. This power can be legislatively delegated by the state to municipalities, government subdivisions, or even to private persons or corporations when they are authorized by the legislature to exercise the functions of public character. Okay, so the whole thing with eminent domain boils down to, is it for some public benefit? Is it for the greater good? And private corporations are not supposed to have the ability to appropriate private property, but they do. And in the case of the Mariner East 2 project, this is another thing that cracks me up. We've gone through Sunoco Logistics, Sunoco, Energy Transfer Partners. I don't know what they're calling themselves now. They keep changing their name, and they keep changing the name of the project. It started out as the Mariner East 2. Then at one point it was called the Pennsylvania Pipeline Project. And then we ended up with the Mariner East 2 and the Mariner East 2X. So this is like, trying to do one of those keep your eye on the ball kind of thing, because it's constantly changing. And it's deliberate, because, you're an individual and you're trying to, figure out how to protect yourself from these companies, and you go to court with your attorney and they show up with their 7 attorneys. But it's
you were not only dealing though with Sunoco, ETP, whatever they were, but you were also dealing with your local folks, your local judge. You were dealing with your local sheriff. You were dealing with the Department of Environmental Protection. And they were all pretty much aligned against you, right?
yeah. I mean, when the surveyor showed up to do another survey, I don't understand if they did a survey the first time and it was the correct survey, why they needed to come back and do a second survey and that, but they did. They were escorted by the Huntington County Sheriff's Department. That's when I most vividly remember you, Mike, because I was sure you were going to be one of the first people arrested that day. But they, on multiple occasions.
Let me just butt in here for a second, because I don't want people to think that I was doing anything illegal. I just want people to know that, yeah, what happened was there was some poor young kid who was trying to videotape what was going on. And your local sheriff basically told him that he couldn't videotape him, and he was threatening to arrest him right away. And I thought, this is crazy. So I kind of, being an old fart, I kind of stepped in and I took the attention away from the kid and basically called the sheriff out on his thing. You can't tell someone you can't take a videotape of someone on private property. So anyway, that's what I did. I wasn't. Yeah. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
You were very adamant in your defense of this person. So, but yeah, so, the Sunoco's whole, I'm going to call them Sunoco because it's the easiest one to remember. Their whole premise for this project was they had purchased the Mariner East 1, which was built in 1930. And its purpose was to actually carry heating oil from Marcus Hook west so that people could heat their homes. So Sunoco buys the Mariner East 1, decides that they're going to build these parallel pipelines. They continue to call it the Mariner East because this is all simply an extension of that original 1930s pipeline, despite the fact that now everything was going in the opposite direction and it was a totally different product. But it's still part of that original Mariner East 1 pipeline that was built. And because that Mariner East 1 had a writ of public conveyance, which certified that it was acting as a transport for this heating fuel, Sunoco didn't have to get a new one, even though the product was entirely different.
Going in a different direction.
Right. But because it was an extension of that original project, they didn't have to apply for a different certificate. So, thanks to loopholes in the law, Sunoco was able to file for eminent domain proceedings against us. And actually, my husband Steve and I were in California. We were with Steve's oldest daughter, and we were taking her on a sightseeing tour. So we were in Northern California. I get a phone call from my youngest daughter. She said, some guy was just here. I have no idea who this person was. He came up to the door. He knocked on it. I answered it. He said, is this the Gerhart residence? I said, yes. And he said, this is for you. And he drops this stack of papers on the porch. That's how we were served with our notice of eminent domain. You know, my daughter, she was freaking out because she had no idea who this guy was. You know, he just drove up in his car, parked in the driveway, came up to the porch, dropped these papers off, and that was it. So that's kind of when our scrambling started. Whoops, did I just lose you? I'm technologically inept, so if I push buttons and things start blinking or going off, just
You're
give me a
good.
second.
You're good.
Okay.
You're still here.
All right, yeah. So in November of 2015, now remember, our first initial contact with the company was in February of 2015. By November 2015, we're in court with our first eminent domain attorney and Sunoco's cadre of attorneys. And it was interesting that the project manager, I'm pretty sure he's no longer project manager, but the project manager at the time went on this ramble about polar vortexes and how Pennsylvania would need, you know, these pipelines to carry this stuff because, you know, if we get another polar vortex, everybody will freeze and all this other stuff. And in the course of his testimony, he said that Pennsylvania, and I'm fuzzy on the numbers, but roughly Pennsylvania required 272,000 barrels of propane to get through the polar vortex. Well, the Mariner East 2 project, when it was finished, was going to be carrying 472,000 barrels. Well, not necessarily propane, but it is 472,000 barrels. So it's like, okay, we don't need to heat our homes that much. You know, if 272 covered us, what do we need the other 200,000 some barrels of this other product? So anyway, in January of 2016, our friend, Judge George Zanuck, President Judge of Huntington County, ruled in favor of Sunoco. And, you know, that was the first of our many get-togethers with Judge Zanuck. Over the course of the next year, he would also grant Sunoco a writ of possession, which is typically used in landlord-tenant disputes. And it's if a landlord is trying to evict somebody who refuses to go, they get a writ of possession saying that you have to leave the property. Okay, it's our property.
Yeah.
You know, they don't own the property, but they have this easement which gives them the right to this 3 acres. They don't pay taxes for it. You know, they aren't liable for it, but it gives them the right to do whatever they want essentially on those 3 acres. So
I think it's real important that people understand a few things. First of all, this is something that you didn't want from the very beginning.
Right.
So the idea of private property is that, you know, you get to choose what's going to happen on the property you own. But that's sort of a fiction, as we are finding out with your story. The second thing is that even though they came in, the judge said they can basically kick you off your own property, that you weren't even allowed on it, right?
Right.
According to the judge.
Well, that was the third thing. He also gave them an injunction. So the injunction stated that we were not allowed to impede any of the work on the property. We were basically not allowed. They put up construction fencing on the edges of the easement. We were not allowed past that construction fencing to impede their work in any way. So they had the eminent domain ruling, they had the writ of possession, and they had an injunction.
And yet you continued to pay taxes.
Yes.
On this property, because it is yours, right? It's your private property that you're not allowed on.
It's still in the deed is still in our name. Yes.
Yeah. And you weren't allowed on it. You had no control over it anymore because, by golly, Judge Zanuck said that Sunoco, ETP, whoever, they had possession of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And this was all for the public good.
Theoretically,
yeah.
Yes. In reality, no. Yeah. So you have the law which says that a government entity can take property with just compensation for the public good. So there's the legal aspect of it. Then you have the courts agreeing that these corporations can act instead of the government to take your property, which may or may not be for the public good. And you essentially have no say in the matter, and what is just compensation? Like you said before, it's not just the monetary value of the dirt and the trees. It's the use that you're getting out of it. And if you want to look at it, okay, the trees are there. The trees are providing a public service. The streams are providing a public service. But yet you're allowing these corporations to come in and disrupt that service, and you have no say in it. There's nothing that you can do about it. I mean, we tried. We threw a few monkey wrenches at them, and we had Camp White Pine. So we did have tree sits, which stalled them for a while. They were unable to clear cut all of the trees on the 3 acres for about 2 years. We held them off. But you get to a point, you just get so frustrated because there's no one you can actually turn to, because the courts aren't supporting you. The laws aren't supporting you. You're kicking up a fuss because you don't want a company tearing up your property to ultimately produce more plastic, and somehow you become the bad guy. And that was one of our other run-ins with Judge Zanuck, because it just got to the point where, you get so frustrated that you feel like you just have to do something because nobody is listening to you. You've tried everything possible, and it's getting you absolutely nowhere. So oh, horror of horrors, I actually went on my own property. You know, I went on the other side of that construction fencing and ended up spending 2 months in jail because of it.
Oh, you did way more than that. I mean, from what I remember, you were able to conjure mountain lions. You brought them in, right?
Yeah, I didn't even have to like transport them. They just, you know, they were at my beck and call.
And I remember horrors of horrors, you actually read Shakespeare, and that was intimidating, right?
It must have been. I mean, I strategically picked my Shakespeare. I picked Macbeth because it had, you know, it has that part in it where the woods march to the castle and that. So I was trying to, you know, get some allegory in there for Sunoco's benefit. And I did Macbeth and The Tempest. So
you are one scary woman.
you know,
Shakespeare and mountain lions. When was the last mountain lion seen in Pennsylvania?
I think Judge Zanuck even said something about like 1880 or something like that, or
But you were able to bring them in.
I know. I conjure them up from, you know, the earth.
And you also brought in bears. I mean, they're unheard of in Huntington County, right?
I know we have absolutely no bears in Huntington County now. Somehow, you know, it always surprises me because when they publish every hunting season, they publish like county by county how many bears are killed in each county. And that year, Huntington had 400 and some. So, but yeah, in around our place, we have no bears.
According to them, anyway, I guess, huh? Because they were amazed.
According to them, we have a whole. I don't know. You don't have a flock of bears. They're not a pack. I don't know what you call a group of bears because they usually don't travel in groups. But apparently, we have maybe like Clan of the Cave Bear. If we're going to stick with our literary stuff here. But yeah, so in that case with the bears, they claimed that I was baiting bears and I was luring them onto the property. The magistrate in that case determined that it was inadvertent, that I wasn't doing it intentionally. Okay, you know what? If you keep a bird feeder out in the wintertime,
yes,
you get bears.
Yeah.
I had a bin full of bird seed on my back porch, and I woke up one morning and the entire wooden bin was in the middle of my yard. So, you know, we have bears here, and it doesn't take a whole lot for them to nose around. And if you actually looked at the easement, I mean, we have photographs of trash that was tossed by Sunoco. You know, old like pizza boxes and what was the one? Oh, pretzel combos and pepperoni sticks. None of that's going to attract bears either. So
it will really. I mean, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that some folks that may be watching this are not aware that when bears are hungry, they'll go after all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. They will go into your car if they smell something inside your car. That's why if you go camping, you know, they tell you to secure any kind of food and stuff like that because bears will go after it.
I mean, I remember backpacking and hanging my food in trees. Yeah. So, I mean, bears, if they're hungry and there's something that smells good, they're going to go for it. So anyway, what they accused you of was bringing these bears onto the pipeline easement. And the fact is, there were bears already probably prowling around all the time. It's just that these folks, they needed an excuse to go after you. One thing that I alluded to it earlier, the guy that I'm running against is, his name is Lee James, and he's on the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee. And
how do all these guys get on these committees in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, especially in Butler County. For some reason, we have 3 on the House committee and 1 in the Senate committee. I don't get it. But anyway, I was looking at his donations, and one of his donations was from Energy Transfer Partners, which is the company that you were dealing with. I ran for this same seat in 2016, and I had already met you, and I knew your story, and I also knew the Holleran story, which is another pipeline story in northeastern Pennsylvania. That was a federal pipeline, FERC. But anyway, the same kind of thing. And after the debate, we had a debate at the Scrubgrass Grange. I talked to Lee and told him your story, and he told me that it was impossible. Well, now I know why he thinks it's impossible, because he's getting donations from Energy Transfer Partners. I mean, and I remember being in the Capitol with you and talking to your representative. She was very supportive of you, right? She was your senator, I believe.
Yes, Judy Ward. Yes. Yeah. No.
No.
She was her at that time. The bill was being proposed that would require anybody caught protesting to pay for any costs resulting from the protests, including like paying for the fire department or the police or whoever had to show up. And that was her focus, was that, these protesters are going to go out and they're going to cause all these problems and they should have to pay for it. Yeah, that was totally not very productive.
The reason I brought that up is I think that's one of the things that is most disappointing to me, is that we have the best government that corporations can buy.
Yeah.
We don't, I mean, your situation where you're beautiful. I mean, it still is, but it's not as beautiful as it was. Your beautiful property, which you had zealously protected for over 30 years, was desecrated because a private corporation wanted to run a pipeline through it.
But wait, part of their thing is they do restoration. Okay. So their restoration, which is another court case that's going on, by my counts, and this was actually going out and going stump to stump and taking pictures of stumps and measuring them and I had at least 200 on those 3 acres that were cut down. Well, first of all, they were contesting with DEP that the wetlands were not forested. There were no trees back there. And any trees that were cut down were trees that were like overhanging, so they didn't really count. Fortunately, we had a judge that agreed with us that yes, it was forested, because that changes their whole mitigation plan then. If they were allowed to proceed with their emergent wetlands, which is what they were claiming the property was, all they would have to do is restore it to grass, and that's it. So by having it declared a forested wetland, they have to plant trees. They have to come back and replant trees. Well, as I said, they cut down at least 200 trees. They did come and replant 67. So we have 67 trees in place of the 200 that they cut down. And of those 67, I'm pretty sure at least 5 of them are dead. And there are several others that don't look very good because they use GPS. They came in with their GPS and their GPS said, okay, you need to put a tree here. You need to put a tree here. You need to put a tree here. Well, they ended up putting 3 trees in ephemeral streams. So when it rains, they're standing in 3 inches of water. They had one tree that I watched them with a pickaxe break up a rock and then plant the tree in that hole. You know,
There's a biblical
so
story around those things, isn't there?
probably. I mean, I'm sure there is. So, you know, what they're saying they're going to do as far as restoration goes is ludicrous. But
I think what's particularly ludicrous is I remember the trees that were there before, and those trees will not be restored in your lifetime, my lifetime, Elise, your daughter's lifetime. I mean, those were magnificent old trees.
yeah,
They're not going to be restored. We're
no,
almost out of time, Ellen, and I wanted to give you a chance to wrap everything up. So,
well, the main point is, you know, corporations have been allowed to exploit loopholes in laws in order to get what they want, in order to make a profit. You know, in some cases, they ignore ordinances, they ignore regulations, they ignore standards, they ignore laws that are on the books. And as you pointed out, these same corporations a lot of times make large campaign contributions to the very legislators whose vote would be needed to close the loopholes. So, you know, you're almost in this no-win situation because the people that you need to, as I said, close these loopholes are getting big campaign contributions from the companies. So, you know, the Constitution of the United States claims that we the people, not we the corporations. And, you know, it's time that we have to make sure that the courts, the legislature, the administration, I mean, we're the ones that elect these people. You know, they are supposed to be working for us.
they are our representatives. Exactly.
That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to represent us because we can't all be going up to Harrisburg every, you know, so often to do this stuff. So we try to pick people who will represent us and will have our best interests in mind. And, you know, instead they bow to these corporations. And it's hard to cut that cord.
Well, this is one of the things that we're running on. And again, check out the website, mikeforpa64.com. It's one of the things we're running on is getting that kind of money out of politics because it distorts everything. It's the high price of corruption. We pay, we the people pay for the corruption that is inflicted on us by the corporations buying our legislators. So anyway, we're wrapping up. I want to thank Ellen, and I hope after you listen to her tonight that you understand why she's one of my heroes. You didn't even get to hear all the good stuff. I didn't talk about what happened in that bar, but that's okay. Anyway, thank you very much, Ellen. That'll be the next time, exactly. Anyway, thank you very much, Ellen, and good night to everybody.
Good night.
See ya. Bye, Ellen.